I've received a question from one of our audience that I believe would be the question of many people out there who don't know what's going on in Ukraine. The question is this: why does Russia not finish the war in a couple of weeks if they're so powerful? And it says that it doesn't make sense that Putin is dragging his feet so long while he's in a much better position than the Ukrainians. What would be the answer to this question, Ray?
Well, the easy answer, the quick answer would be that he has chosen a strategy of attrition, offensive attrition now, where the new word is attrit. They attrit, they attrit, they attrit in a very moderated, actually, I think that was the term used yesterday by Shoigu, the defense minister. We have a moderated policy of attrition. Now, that said, Shoigu also pointed out that the Ukrainians have brought up their only reserves into the battle now and have pretty much run out of reserves. So what happens when the attrition reaches the point where there's nobody to attrit anymore? I mean, that's one way of putting it. The military experts that I rely on tell me that could come in just a couple of weeks. The attrition has been so successful. Now, how about this general strategy of not going forward when you could? Well, you know, I like maps, right? And if you look at a map of Ukraine, and you see where the Dnieper River is, the traditional dividing line between East and West Ukraine, and you look at where the Donbass is and those other oblast provinces that Russia has now incorporated, Kherson and Zaporozhye, that's really just a minor part of that half of Ukraine. I haven't heard this from any of my military specialists, but I'm going to venture the guess that the Russians look at maps, you know, and they say, do we want to be responsible for that much more territory, fertile field for insurrectionists, terrorists of all stripes who want to get back at us for taking part of what became their country? I don't think we want that. I mean, we saw what happened in Vietnam and Afghanistan, Iraq. I mean, are we that stupid? No, we're not that stupid. We'll just move gradually here. We may move toward the Dnieper, but as long as we get a different kind of regime in Kiev, well, we could work out a deal. The only thing we will require is a zone where we could be protected from enemy fire. So the longer the range of the weapons that come from the West, the broader this sanitary zone will have to be. So as long as the West understands that, and as long as the West doesn't do anything really stupid, we should be able to talk some sense into them after a while. Now, the state of play at the current juncture is that the EU has freed up some $54 billion worth of aid for Ukraine. Oh, isn't that great? Why did they do that? Because the US told them to do that. It's that simple, okay? And why did the US tell them to do that? Because the US wants to go to the US administration, wants to go to the US Congress and say, well, look, you know, the Europeans are coming forward here. Are we going to leave our Zelensky and other Ukrainian friends in the lurch now? Is that what we're going to do? No, you have to come up with 61 billion more. You got to do that. Look at the Europeans. So that's the name of that game. Now, the result will be this. That money will come late to the party. Okay. That money won't come into proper usage It's not money they need right now, except to pay their civil servants and their soldiers and so forth. The money that they really need is not to be fruitfully used because they have no industrial capacity to produce the weapons that can help them prevail. Now, here's Putin calculating all this and saying, oh God, won't these guys ever come to their senses? And the answer he'll get from his own mind is no, they won't. Why? Because there's an election coming up. And as Putin himself has said, and I can quote him verbatim, most of US foreign policy and military policy decisions are made on the basis of domestic politics. Now, end quote. Now, in an election year, that goes in spades. So not most, but about 90%. So I'm Vladimir Putin, and I say, well, should I? I mean, Biden can't afford to lose this war so obviously. He'll lose the election. He has a personal stake in that. This other guy comes in, he's going to prosecute him probably. So what's Biden going to do if I have a big advance toward the Dnieper River? Well, I don't really have to have a big advance. All I need is a cordon sanitaire, a demilitarized zone where I can protect the people of Donetsk and Zaporozhye and Kherson provinces. So I think that's the deal. It's amazing how calculating Putin is, and how even though he has strong opposition, and lots of people in the Kremlin tell him, come on, Vladimir Vladimirovich, you gotta, I mean, look, don't let him stop you now. He says, look, I know, I was naive. His word. I was naive. I trusted the West. I let them deceive me for 7 years with the Minsk Accords. I shouldn't have done that. I recognize that. But now is now. And we're going to just follow this very, very successful attrition policy. What does it take for a person to acknowledge that kind of extreme mistake? I mean, the people in Lugansk and Donetsk were imploring him with every Russian Orthodox prayer they could summon up. Please, please take us in like you did Crimea. Why don't you do that? He said, no. We have respect for our then Western partners, and we're going to do this Minsk thing. After all, the Security Council at the UN approved the Minsk deal unanimously. The U.S. and Britain, everybody. So let's take this negotiation, this peaceful path, and see where it lands. Now he knows, and it's not only that he knows that. It's not only that Chancellor Merkel at the time and President Francois Hollande from France admitted, starting in December 2022, it was just, we tricked Putin. It was just a delaying tactic to let us build up Ukrainian forces to NATO standards and get NATO weaponry in there. And look at them now. Look at what they were in 2014. Nothing. Putin could have come in and taken over the whole place. But now, look at them now. Hollande said the same thing. And to put icing on the cake, most people still don't know that a deal was reached, a deal between Ukrainian negotiators and the Russians, first in Minsk, in Belarus, not in Minsk, but in small towns in Belarus, and then in Istanbul. We have all kinds of people who are involved in one way or another attesting to that, including 2 of the Ukrainian negotiators who said, we had a deal. All we had to do is say, no Ukraine in NATO. a neutral Ukraine. And we had all kinds of, we had codicils. We had them all worked out where troops were deployed and everything else. And the US and Britain said, no, don't do that. The Russians are bad people. We will guarantee you all manner of support for as long as it takes. Well, as you know, probably, Nima, now we say for long as we can. And we can't anymore. Sorry about that, Ukraine, because we don't have any more money appropriated by Congress. And even if we had the money, we can't give you the arms because we can't produce them that quickly. So that's the situation. So it's a legitimate question. Lots of people ask this, especially people in Russia. Vladimir Vladimirovich, why the hell? Short was me. Well, why didn't you go ahead and do what you had to do back in 2014, for God's sake? And he says, okay, I was wrong. I was deceived. I was naive. I'm not naive anymore, but I'm still perspicacious. I'm still cautious. I'm still gradually going forward, keeping my options open, giving the West some sort of chance to work out a deal that they might be able to, well, put lipstick on a pig of a deal, okay? But let's give them that chance rather than sacrifice still more Russian troops, not to mention the thousands of Ukrainian troops, to the extent they can raise them in this draft that they're trying to plan. Let's see if we can do this in a peaceable way, given all the pressures that Biden has in an election year. I hope I haven't been too complicated on that, but that's my view. I'm not always right, obviously, no one is, but that's how I see the implications of what Putin has said, what more hardliners in the Kremlin have said, and how he's admitted to having made mistakes in the past that he's not going to repeat this time around.
Zelensky's advisor Yermak said that Ukraine doesn't need a backup plan. They can win this war in Ukraine. In your opinion, if they don't have a backup plan, who's gonna define a backup plan, a plan B for the Ukrainians? Is it going to be the Biden administration or the other guy who may come to power in 2024? Nobody knows that.
Nima, as you know, I try to keep a lighter tone on some of these very serious things, but the more I hear about Zelensky to Zelensky, blah, 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 but Zelensky to Zelensky, you're delusional, Zelensky. No, you're delusional, Zelensky. I mean, it reminds me of a novel, what actually was a play written by Nikolai Gogol called Revizor, the Inspector General. And he comes to this town, this little provincial town in Russia, and it's a scream. And for those of you who do English, Danny Kaye, that wonderful comedian, played the Inspector General in something called the Inspector General. So in those days, it was Dobchinski and Bobchinski. Bobchinski said to Dobchinski, you're delusional, but Dobchinski, but now you got delusional, Zelensky and delusional. I mean, I wish it were funny. Well, it is a little funny. Anyhow, so what's going on here? Who's calling the shots? Well, we know that some of my friends call her the Wicked Witch of the West, Victoria Nuland, who is largely responsible for this whole mess since 2014, and that's 10 years. Can you believe it? She went to Kiev 2 days ago. And what did she do there? Well, she saved her little protege, Zelensky. Why? Well, because there was an open revolt against Zelensky. He said, he called his commander of his armed forces in, and he said, you're fired. And Zelensky said, no, I'm not. Well, yes, you are fired. I'm the commander-in-chief, and you're fired. Well, okay, well, I'm not leaving, okay? Well, Zelensky had somebody all ready to take over. So all he had to do is appoint this guy. His name was Budanov. So he says, all right, Budanov, you're on. You're going to take Zaluzhny's place. And Budanov says, oh, I changed my mind. I changed my mind. I can't do that. Now, Budanov hasn't had any real command experience in military affairs. He's been a spy. He's been a special forces type of guy. You know, he's commanded a squad of 12 or 15 people. And nobody likes him. I mean, nobody usually likes the head of spying, not only on others, but on the military themselves. So maybe he saw some handwriting on the wall. He was not, well, not going to work out well for me if I take over as commander-in-chief. These other generals are not going to obey my orders, okay? So what happens? Well, that happened Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Here comes Victoria Nuland, like a fireman in to put out this fire, right? And the next thing you know, Zelensky was still in power. She talked to these guys, and what'd she say? She probably said, well, look, you know, we're going to try to keep you afloat for several more months, maybe a year, for as long, well, sorry, we can't say as long as it takes. How about for as long as we can? But we're not going to do that if you don't obey our puppet master, our guy here. And his name still is Zelensky. He's always been my favorite. Obey him. If he wants to fire you, just slink into the background, because the alternative is no more money, no more arms, and you, Zelensky, having claimed some battlefield successes back a year ago, forget about it. You ain't got nothing but defeat in store for you. So, to the degree that's the case, and to the degree that Zelensky seems to be really a little sensitive to the fact that sending the flower of Ukrainian youth into carnage, and the reports from people like Cy Hirsch that Zelensky has been dealing with some Russians behind Zelensky's back, and the fact that Zelensky back in December said, well, it's a stalemate. You know, maybe we ought to recognize it's a stalemate. We're not going to win. All those things enter into the fray. So it's really hard to know what Victoria Nuland succeeded in doing. Seems, for the nonce at least, that she seemed to read the riot act to these clowns in Kiev and say, look, all right, it's not your turn yet, Zelensky. Zelensky is still our guy. Zelensky is going to get our money and our arms, if anybody. And so read the implications of that. Now, that having been said, it just may be that Victoria Nuland has not got all power or overweening power in Kiev anymore. I mean, she's led them down the garden path, and except for the proto-Nazis that are still a major force in their government, it may be that the generals are saying, my God, it's a bad idea, a really bad idea, and get rid of Zelensky anyway and suffer the consequences and make the best deal they can with the Russians, okay? So I don't know which way it's going to come out. I hope the latter, because a lot fewer people will be killed. But that's how I see the intervention by Deus ex machina, Victoria Nuland, wafting down into Poland and then taking a secret train into Kiev to talk with Zelensky and Zelensky and Dovchinsky and Zelensky and tell them, you're delusional, Zelensky, if you think you can count on our support for cooing or getting rid of Zelensky. So it's pretty complicated, more complicated than I've made it, I think. But those are the two outcomes that I see coming out of all this. Meanwhile, Russia is advancing. Avdeevka, the main fortification from which the Ukrainians were shelling Donetsk, the city of Donetsk, the civilians in Donetsk before the invasion, and still were, that's about to fall. And so those who say that Russia can go to the Dnieper, well, you know, they always could. It's just that, you know, they're a little sparing about Russian soldiers. And if they can do it gradually and prevent fatalities and injuries. That's what they'll do, in my opinion. Again, I don't have a corner on the truth, but that's how I read it, Nima.
Ray, with the situation that we're witnessing right now, do you see Odessa and Nikolaev turning Russian?
That's a really good question. I've said since October of 2022 that the Russians are prepared to deal on Odessa. Did I make that up out of thin air? No, I didn't. Putin, on October 27th, 2022, in answer to a question at one of these long Q&As, 3.5 hours following a half-hour speech by Putin, extemporaneous, he's asked this question. Now, I suspect it was a staged question. It was very clever. This Serbian journalist is, Mr. President, I'm thinking of going on a trip to Odessa, and I may go real soon, or I may be a couple of years from now. But I'm just wondering, Mr. President and Mr. President Putin, should I apply for a Ukrainian or for a Russian visa? Pretty clever, huh? So now Putin rises to the occasion, and he says, Odessa, beautiful, beautiful city, deteriorating now, but always been since Catherine the Great. It's always been a major part of Russia on the Black Sea there. Yes, you should go. You should go for sure. But you should realize that in a wider political sense, Odessa could be a Yabloko Razdora. Yabloko in Russian is apple. Razdor, discord. Okay, so he's referring back to the Trojan War. I mean, that happened even before I was born, right? Trojan War, apple of discord. Okay, Odessa could be an apple of discord, or it could be a way of conflict resolution where both sides kind of see the other side's needs and negotiate. That's what Putin says. Now, that's almost a direct quote. Now, what was he saying? Well, number one, I think he was saying, hey, look, you Americans, you don't talk to Lavrov, my foreign minister, you don't talk to me, talk to anybody. Listen, I'm trying to tell you, here's an offer for, okay? Now, Odessa doesn't have to be, well, Odessa could be a way of resolving these things. That's what I just said. What could that mean? Well, it could mean, make it an international city. There are all kinds of ways to do this. But I recognize, says Putin, that without Odessa, there's no real Ukraine. I mean, it becomes a landlocked farm for the rest of Europe. I mean, really nice farm, but can't have genuine commerce if it doesn't have access to the Black Sea. So we don't necessarily want Ukraine that's powerless or not really a full country. We still believe these guys are our brothers, okay? So, we don't have to go all the way to the Dnieper River. Let's see if we can work something out with respect to Odessa, okay? Now, I don't know if people in the CIA where I used to work and where we read all this stuff in the original as soon as we got it on a TASS wire. It's all they have, right? Whether they read this stuff, I mean, it was 3.5 hours into a 4-hour session. I mean, maybe these guys just can't stay awake. I don't know if Biden was ever apprised of this, what I consider to be a tentative, a feeler, an offer, okay? In any case, I think that's pretty much gone now. I think that it's really clear that Putin's advisors are saying, now, Vladimir Vladimirovich, for God's sake, you're not going to do one of these things again. I mean, Odessa is ours. Look what they did to the pro-Russian people in Odessa on May 2nd, 2014. Look what happened. 40 people burned alive or thrown out of windows in that trade center. You remember that, Vladimir? So I think, well, if I were advising Biden, I would still mention that to him and say, well, maybe it's not too late, you know? Maybe Odessa could be worked out as a sort of a twofold kind of city where Ukrainian commerce could exist still, and Ukraine could be a viable country in and of itself. So that's the Odessa part. Nikolaev, it's pretty much the same deal. Kharkov, Kharkiv, as the Ukrainians say, that's a biggie. That's the second biggest country. You know, what will they do there? Well, Kharkiv, that's much closer to Russia proper. There was bloody encounters there a year and a half ago. The Russians are advancing in that area in a very determined way. I don't know, but if I were Putin, I would want to take over a city like Kharkiv or Odessa. I'd much prefer to work out a deal and have this cordon sanitaire in place, recognized by not only a Ukrainian government, a new one, have to replace the Zelensky, and the U.S. and then as anybody else who wants to have peace there or finally have peace. So that's how I read that. Sorry to be so long-winded.
Ray, shifting the gear to the conflict in the Middle East, we had this attack on the US troops in Jordan. How did you find this event that has happened in Jordan, and how bad it can get, in your opinion?
Well, and let me just say, first off, that just as Obama warned back in 2016 that we ought to be careful in Ukraine because Russia has escalatory dominance. Pretty fancy word. Yeah. Obama went to jail. Okay, people understand. What it means is Russia's right there. And if there's escalation, Russia will always have the top hand here, short of nuclear war, of course. That's another question. Now, in the Middle East now, the U.S., no matter how many ships, warships it has in the Fifth Fleet and the Sixth Fleet, no longer has escalatory dominance, okay? Israel has mousetrapped us into Biden proclaiming full support for whatever Israel does. And that has come in the form of unlimited bombs like 2,000-pound bombs flattening a square mile of homes in Gaza. It's come in terms of ammunition. There are cargo flights leaving Cyprus, a British air base there, every day, several of them going into Tel Aviv, disgorging these arms, and they're being used in Gaza, okay? So, you know that the International Court of Justice said, there's a plausible case that genocide is going on in Gaza. What does that mean? Well, that means that the people who enable genocide would be equally culpable, right? Our country enabling genocide. Now, worse still, now, how can anything be worse still? But worse still, famine. Famine. People dying of hunger has now entered the equation. Now we talk about all those people lucky enough to escape being buried in the rubble, right? Yeah, they're really lucky, aren't they? Because they have no water to drink. They have no food to eat. Really lucky that they're still alive. They won't be alive very much longer. Now, there are people, not Americans, unless you speak of Native Americans, not Americans who know about famine. I know because my great-grandparents survived the famine in Ireland in the middle 19th century. I know what it was like. I heard the stories. I knew that there was food there that the British were exporting to make a profit in other colonies. I know that 1 million of my forefathers died the famine. Okay, luckily, my great-great-grandparents survived and came to the United States. Now, who else knows about famine? Oh, you know, there's a fellow named Putin. His name Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, whose big brother Viktor starved to death. He starved to death during the siege of Leningrad, which we marked just last week. Siege of Leningrad was for something like 950 days, and 1 million plus people who lived in Leningrad perished, most of them from famine. And 2 years ago, when President Putin was in Leningrad, he was standing before this humongous mound. It's a monument to those who, not only a monument, it's where they're buried, okay? They put the bodies in there, okay? He's standing before that, and somebody asked him about his big brother Viktor. Said, what about you? Do you know where your big brother Viktor is buried? And he got very somber. He said, yeah, over there. Putin's mother had to give up Viktor when he was 1 year old because she didn't have anything to feed him. There was a kind of a nursing home or a hospice sort of thing for little babies, right? Where they had some milk and they had some sustenance, but he didn't survive. His mother never saw him again. Vladimir was not yet born, and so she doesn't know what happened to him. She never got word. So Vladimir says he's over there. Well, Putin's mother was given up for dead. During the Great Hunger there, she looked dead, and so she was put on top of a pile of dead bodies. And by lucky happenstance, Putin's father came along, saw her there, rushed up and saw that she was still breathing, took care of her, nursed her back to health. He himself had been wounded by the Nazis that's trying to defend a bridge in Leningrad. And long story short, a couple of years later, little Vladimir Vladimirovich appeared to this couple that knew famine, knew war, knew the loss of a child. Okay, that's a long way of saying some people know about famine. I know about famine, but Vladimir Vladimirovich knows a lot more. Will there be famine in Gaza? Well, who's to help? Oh, the UN. The UN has a UNRWA. That's their organ that's going to give good help, like food and supplies and medical care. Uh-oh. The US and the UK and other nations have just defunded UNRWA. Couldn't pick a worse time to do that, could you? Well, why did they defund them? Oh, because the Israelis told us that 12 of the 26,000 employees of UN UNRWA were Hamas participants or Hamas. No, not 12. They corrected that. No, it was 6. So 6 out of 26,000. Now, Tony Blinken got up and he said, now, we find these Israeli reports very credible. We don't have any independent confirmation, but we find them very credible. And so we're going to pull the plug on UNRWA. We're not going to give them any more money. Now, he didn't say this, but the effect of which is there'll be famine in Gaza. There's already widespread hunger. But now those people that survive, get out of the rubble, yeah, they're really lucky, aren't they? They're going to die of famine. Can't think of a worse way to die. So that's the way things are headed. Now, who's trying to stop this? Well, beside people like me that don't have much effect on things, we have a bizarre combination of Iran-backed Houthis. Houthis? Who are they? Well, they're these people in Yemen who, run around shooting up ships, and before that, terrorizing other places there in our Persian Gulf or our Red Sea. Whoa, what do you mean? Well, we tried to help the Saudis beat these guys, beat them to a pulp, and we were air refueling their bombers, and they bombed the hell out of Yemen. But these guys don't stop. They have not only this incredible will toward self-preservation, but they have this, my God, it's hard to believe for us, altruistic view that Palestinians shouldn't be given the same treatment. And so they have decided that if there's not a ceasefire and a resupply of food and other medicines to Gaza, we're going to hit all the ships that are headed toward Israel, or all the ships that have Israeli registration or ownership on their way up to Israeli ports. And maybe the Israelis will get the message. Maybe they ought to stop the genocide. Okay, now, do the Houthis have any allies in trying to do that? Wow, they do. Who is it? It's the International Court of Justice, which has given, what's only about 2 weeks left now, has given Israel 2 weeks to come back with a report with how they're trying to stop the genocide in Gaza. So now there's a weird combination for you, huh? Iran-backed dissidents or terrorists with the UN International Court of Justice agreeing that this genocide needs to stop. The UN trying to do it in diplomatic ways. The Houthis trying to do it in the only way that they think the Israelis will listen, hurting them economically. What's the main problem? Well, most people think the Israelis will not stop doing what they're doing. And the only people that can stop the Israelis from doing what they're doing are the people that rule my country, the United States of America. And I never thought that I would be a citizen of a country that would be supporting genocide. My God, it doesn't get any worse than that. We can only hope and pray that this latest flurry of attacks on Iran-backed terrorists and their reaction to U.S. attacks. After all, there are 2,500 troops, U.S. troops left in Iraq, not really welcomed there. 900 or so plus in Syria. They're sitting ducks. Now, I understand that Bobby Kennedy Jr. has just called for U.S. troops to be withdrawn from those places. They're, as he said, targets. Do people want to use these U.S. troops as targets? Well, I dare say some very extreme people in Washington want precisely that. Why? Because they want a war. They want a war against Iran, and so does Israel. They want to put them in their place, and there are dangers there that nobody ever mentions. And I'll close this little segment with mentioning one of those dangers. The foreign minister, actually, no, the president of Iran was up in Moscow 2 months ago, had extensive talks with Vladimir Putin, and they agreed on signing a new treaty, a 20-year treaty on strategic cooperation. Whoa, is there a treaty already? Yeah, there is. It's a 10-year treaty, but they're making it more powerful, putting more teeth into it. And whereas it's likely to fall short of being a mutual defense treaty, that is, obligating each side to come to the automatic defense of the other in case the other is attacked, it may fall short of that, just as the Russian treaty with China doesn't explicitly make that undertaking, but it's of immense significance. Now, I know that because I read it in the press. I know that because there are recent reports that, well, it needs to be is signed and then approved by the relevant parliaments in each country. That's big. It couldn't be bigger. So, is Iran alone in this? No, it's not alone. For God's sake, if it was alone before, uh, this strange combination of Russia and Iran is something that our policymakers should deal with. Now, I may be wrong, but I don't even know if Tony Blinken or Jake Sullivan know about this new treaty between Iran and Russia. If they don't know about it, then of course Biden doesn't know about it. So are they going to take a chance to get Iran involved militarily with them? I hope not. I think there are signs that somebody realizes that's not a good idea, but I wouldn't rule it out. And if they don't know about this treaty, it's concluded. Okay. It has what the Russians call military technical agreements within it. It provides, according to other reporting, for the Iranians to manufacture some very sophisticated Russian weaponry, give 70% of them back to Russia and keep the 30%. It's very technical, but it's very, very close to a defense treaty. So that's, not only do we not have escalatory dominance in that area, but we have this new issue. Iran is a quasi ally of Russia. And by the way, 2 nights ago on Russian TV, a panelist on one of these prominent shows said, Russia is an ally of Iran. Now, that doesn't mean anything in a vacuum, but with this treaty in existence, So what does that mean? I guess that means that this thing is very explosive, that it's hard to know with these benighted people telling Biden which end is up. Will they tell him that, we can escalate, we can go, we can keep beating these people and Iran won't possibly do anything. We can even maybe take out some Iranian things, and nobody will do anything. Well, I'm here to tell you that Russia's going to do something. I don't know exactly what. Okay, and not only Russia, but China has immense interest in what happens in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf because they get a whole lot of oil from Iran. So there you have it. This new constellation with Russia and China on one side of things, with Iran now part of BRICS since January 1st. That's big too. I just wish that somebody would talk some sense into Biden and his acolytes, because this is getting very dangerous.
Just to wrap up this session, I want to talk about the Netanyahu position right now in Israel. It seems that the Netanyahu administration is agreeing on some sort of ceasefire in Gaza. What do they want to have this ceasefire in Gaza? And the other question would be, how do you see the future of Netanyahu and his administration in Israel? Is that going to save them? Is that going to help them to convince the Israelis that they would be so effective in having all the benefits for Israel and Israelis?
Nima, this is a tough one, and I wish I knew more about Israeli politics at the very top. What I do know is that if Netanyahu is somehow shunted aside, not only would that be a disaster for him personally, since he could well end up in jail under these bribery and other corruption charges, but the guys that would take his place are worse than he is, if that's possible. So, as I understand it, 70% of Israeli people want to pursue this vengeance, you know. Bible says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. That's the Hebrew scriptures, okay? Israelis are saying, vengeance is ours, says us. So, again, we come back to how they could do this, how they could work their will on the Palestinians so that they could exterminate them. That was a term used back in the 30s and 40s about what the Nazis were doing to the Jews. Now, I regret that even though my country knew about what was going on in those concentration camps and so forth, we didn't do all we could to stop it. As a matter of fact, with shiploads of Jewish people escaping Germany and arriving on our shores, you want to know what anti-Semitism really is like? Well, here's Franklin Roosevelt. What do we do with all these Jews? Eleanor, Franklin, you give them temporary visas and you get them in the country out of harm's way. Franklin, sorry, can't do that. Eleanor, you can't do that? No. Well, she didn't ask why, but we know why. It just wasn't a very popular political thing to do, to let a bunch of Jews in your country at that time. We're talking at the very beginning of the war. Now, Eleanor, whom I greatly admire, to her credit, manufactured visas and gave them to all the passengers of this one ship right off the shores of the state of Virginia, and told them, get out of town, get into the hinterland. And we have lots of refugees from that ship still alive, their descendants still alive. So all I'm saying is that anti-Semitism is a real thing, okay? And it has political dimensions, and FDR was not above that, okay? So now it's reversed. Now, if people are doing genocide and you criticize it, you are accused of being anti-Semitic. I mean, I'd hate to have to try to explain this to a seventh graders. It's just very, very bizarre and very complicated. But those oppressed back in the 30s and 40s are now oppressing the people in Gaza. Why? Well, they're not a pure white race, are they? They don't look like us, do they? Now, they're human animals, as the Israeli defense minister referred to Palestinians. So it's the same syndrome, racism at work. And I dare say, when our media in the United States talks about the refugees in Gaza, well, they don't get the same positive gloss as those Ukrainian refugees, all those thousands of Ukrainian refugees. And I think part of the reason, Nima, is they look like us. Palestinians don't look like us.